This is the Sackville River. It runs through Sackville before meandering its way down through Bedford and emptying into the Bedford Basin. The portion that runs through Bedford is particularly interesting because it's a highly urbanized area, so that's the portion that this video will focus on. So what's the big deal about a river running through a developed area? Well, the thing about this river is that it floods, and when it floods, it puts people, property, and infrastructure at risk. These photos are from a flood that happened after a heavy rainstorm in 2014. Floods like this are considered to be 1 in 20-year floods. In other words, there is a 5% chance that it could happen in any given year. This is a naturally flooding river. It has a natural floodplain that floods every so often regardless of human intervention. But humans can certainly make the flooding worse, for example, through urbanization. And unfortunately, we've done just that. We've built homes, highways, and commercial plazas right in the floodplain. One really bad example of this is the Bedford Place Mall. It's in a low-lying area right next to the river, surrounded by huge impermeable parking lots that make for poor drainage. Impermeable surfaces like this can make flooding a lot worse in the area because they prevent water from filtering into the ground, creating tons of runoff. So what's being done about this? Well, in 1981, a study was conducted to determine the extent of the area at risk of flooding. This informed policies and regulations found in Bedford's municipal planning strategy and their land use bylaw. As a result, Bedford's zoning map includes the floodway zone and the floodway fringe designation. Floodway zones include areas within the 1 in 20-year floodplain. These zones are mostly limited to recreational uses and infrastructure for water management. The floodway fringe area includes the areas within the 1 in 100-year floodplain, so flooding here is pretty rare, although it can happen. Floodway fringe areas don't restrict what kind of land uses can be developed, but they do require for any new buildings to be flood-proofed. In 2012, Halifax Regional Council recognized the need to update the zoning to reflect more recent floodplain mapping. Remember, at this point they're working with data from 1981. So, in 2017, a new study was completed which showed that the flood risk area was a lot larger than they realized. This map shows the 1981 floodlines in yellow and the much larger 2017 floodlines in red. There are a couple possible reasons for this change. Human factors such as urbanization and climate change may have caused the floodplain to literally grow. However, the 2017 study also mentions that we have much more data available and better computer modeling tools than we did in 1981. So now we have a much more accurate understanding of where the floodlines actually are. After the 2017 study, HRM updated the Bedford zoning bylaw to reflect the... Wait, they didn't? Alright, time for a little update. It's 2024 now, and the zoning around the Sackville River is still based on 1981 floodlines, but hopefully that'll change soon. A 2018 report from HRM staff recommended that Council initiate the process to amend the bylaw to reflect the more recent floodplain study. Later that year, they held a few public open house sessions, but not much more came of it. The updated regulations were expected in 2020, but in 2024, we're still waiting. Now, if you've been living in Nova Scotia and keeping up with the news, you'll probably remember the severe rain and flooding that we got in July 2023, just weeks after wildfires devastated the province. These floods displaced hundreds of people, caused serious damage to buildings, and even caused injury and death. All this just 9 years after the last floods hit Bedford in 2014. Clearly, this issue is becoming more and more urgent as the climate changes and our weather becomes more extreme. It's unfortunate that it took another destructive flood to get this issue back on the agenda, but it seems like politicians and the public are starting to recognize the increasing urgency. As of 2024, HRM's website indicates that staff are back to work on updating Bedford's land use bylaw, with plans to run more engagement sessions this year. Policies and regulations on land use can be a useful tool to mitigate flood risk, if they're kept up to date. But the 2017 floodplain study also recommends some other solutions that might have some potential. One recommendation is property buyouts. This would mean buying up homes that have been flooded to compensate people who were displaced and prevent people from living in the floodplain in the future. After the 2014 floods, the councillor for the Bedford area called on the provincial government to purchase homes along Union Street, which is notorious for flooding, but the province didn't really give it any serious consideration. After the 2023 floods, some Bedford residents were displaced for many months, and once again, Halifax Regional Council put pressure on the province to take action. Once again, though, the province has yet to commit to any buyouts, and it's unclear if they will. After all, property buyouts could be a major financial commitment. It would certainly set an interesting precedent, with the province spending money to bail out just a few homeowners, and it may not be politically popular. Another potential mitigation measure is river restoration. This can involve reintroducing a natural meandering form to the river in areas where it's been impacted by urbanization. It adds storage and drainage capacity, plus it's a great way to restore habitat and increase biodiversity. The 2017 study even notes that community groups can play a major role here. The municipality really just needs to do the excavation work. And guess what? There's already a community-based restoration effort happening at the Sackville River, although it's mostly focused on restoring habitat. But this could be a huge opportunity for HRM to get involved and partner with community groups to mitigate flood risk. Alright, let's circle back to the measures that are actually in place. Obviously, Bedford's zoning regulations need updating, but hopefully that'll happen sooner rather than later. In general, using policy and regulations to prevent development in floodplains is an important measure in the long run, but it won't really have much immediate effect. The thing about zoning is that it only impacts new development. Pre-existing buildings still have the right to keep on existing as long as they want. So while it's important to have up-to-date regulations, it's kind of the bare minimum. It's an easy, non-structural solution that doesn't involve much actual intervention. To do a good job at mitigating flood risk, we're going to need more than just one solution. We need to have a discussion on what measures will be fair and effective to keep people, property, and infrastructure safe, both in the short term and the long term. The climate is changing, and unless it stops tomorrow, we're going to have to change along with it. And that's a case study in climate adaptation.